then. Should I do something with that showed up? Ryan, just
No.
hit,
Push
will it go away?
Just hit got it.
You just hit got it. Just hit
Okay.
got it.
Okay,
Yes.
I can do that. There we go.
Let me know when you're fired up for Facebook there.
I thought you were asking if you should do something about me showing up because
No,
I
no.
didn't notice this until it was sold out.
Yeah.
But I figured it's the same link as last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we keep
It's always the same link.
Yeah, I'm ready whenever, Lawrence.
Okay. So did you fire Facebook up already?
Yep, it's just getting started here.
Okay. All right. Well, folks, it's 10:30 on a Thursday, and that means it's time to get started. We have a very interesting guest today, and we have a very interesting topic that I think will kind of stretch our ability to perceive life from another's point of view. And our guest today is Mary Haug, and she's the author of Out of Loneliness. It's a murder memoir, and it covers how the 1962 murder of Myron Menzie somehow changed the small town of Chamberlain. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Hello to everyone.
Yeah. So I'd like to start off by having you give us the elevator speech for Mary. What's Mary's elevator speech, and who is Mary, and what the heck is she all about anyway?
Well, I don't know that answer. I'm living in Minneapolis now for 4 years because my family's up here, but I'm a South Dakota native of 70 some years. The land where I grew up was Lyman County, just west of the river, about 20 miles. So my hometown was Reliance. I grew up with 4 siblings, 3 brothers and a sister, and a father who told stories and a mother who told stories. So hearing and read, they were readers. So hearing and reading stories was just a part of my childhood. In part too, because we didn't have television until I was in 8th grade. So, that didn't take up much of my time for all those growing up years. Went to school in Chamberlain High School, and then because of bad weather, we lived in town during the winter because of bad weather. There was an incident where my father had to drag my 3 older siblings a mile or so, well, maybe not quite that far, through a terrible blizzard to the house. English major, taught English at South Dakota State University for 30 years, retired, and started writing books. This is my 2nd book. And I have 2 grandchildren up here and my husband, and it's been a good move. So,
Well, that's a pretty fast moving elevator.
well, I can tell more if you want.
Yeah, almost got vertigo. So let's talk a little bit about the book.
Okay.
Can you tell us what is the premise of the book? And we'll get into some other things, but just so people have a kind of a background, what's the premise of the book?
Well, the premise of the book really is, I'll back up. I think I probably have disappointed some readers because I think they were looking for a murder mystery or a true crime story, or a detective story. It's not that. It's a memoir. And the murder is, I suppose, what kicked off the story, but it's not the story. The story is not of the murder. It's not incidental, but it certainly does not take up most of the book. When I was 16, in May of 1962, a woman named Beverly Waugh, 24-year-old laundry worker, who was, in retrospect, likely a transgender male. The only language I had for her in 1962 was tomboy. I mean, she looked very masculine. She dressed masculine. but we didn't have the language, right, in 1962. The psychiatrist did not have the language. In the murder trial, they called her a third sex. They didn't have the language for transgender. She murdered a young Native man, a young Lakota man named Myron Menzie, 21, handsome, very, just a hardworking, really nice young man who was engaged to a pretty teenage girl named Gina, who was having an affair with Bev at the same time. So it was, so first of all, we have the murder, which is pretty shocking in Chamberlain, South Dakota in 1962. And then you add the component of this very unusual love triangle involving gender and sexuality issues that certainly I didn't understand at 16. And so, you know, I never forgot the story, but when I was cleaning out my mother's house in Chamberlain in 1999, I found a picture of Bev Waugh. My mother had saved the front page, well, I guess the whole paper, the Mitchell Daily Republic, and Bev Waugh's picture and her lawyer. And if you've grown up in South Dakota, Samuel Masson was a lawyer, and that may be a name that rings a bell for some of you. I had remembered Bev as huge and scary and brawny and fierce, and she was tiny, just tiny. She wore a size 6 cowboy boot. And I took the paper home because I was just like, well, why didn't I get this? What didn't I understand about this story? Took it home, put it in a file, and kind of forgot about it. And then over the years, something came up and I pulled that out, and I began to think, what else didn't I know about growing up in Chamberlain? What else didn't I know about life, you know, which I found out was a whole lot. And so I went back to Chamberlain, went to the courthouse, got the trial transcripts, and much to my surprise, I found the love letters that the women had written to one another, which was a gift and a burden, really, because on the one hand, I had their words. I had what they thought and what was going on in their lives in their own words. I mean, that was a gift for a writer, but it was also a burden in trying to decide, do I have the right to use these letters, which in the long run I did. Immersing myself into that story, I think more than anything made me better understand how wide encompassing the possibilities of being human are. I grew up, there's one way, you know, it's a binary, you're male, female, you're straight, and I wouldn't even know I'm gay. You're white, you're black, you're native, you know. I had these very narrow understandings of what it meant to be human. And the more I read the story, the more I began to really think about Bev and Gina, the more I realized there's just a lot of ways for us to express ourselves, or to be ourselves, not even express ourselves, because someone might think that's a choice. You know, you express yourself by being gay. No, you're gay, right? You're bisexual, you're transgender. It's not a choice. And through that, I just think I learned so much and began to understand so much more about what it means to be human. I suppose I would call it a coming of age story, and when I was 60, which seems a little late to come of age, but I guess that's better than never coming of age, right?
So it sounds like there was a few transitions happening, one in the story, and the story of those people changing, and of course the sexual or gender transition. But it sounds like there was a Mary transition as well, like changing from one person to being another person.
Well, yeah, and actually, when I was the next year after the murder, I mean, lots of people came to town and dragged, you know, if you lived in a small town in South Dakota, you dragged Maine, right? That's all you did on Friday and Saturday night, you dragged Maine. Kids were coming in from other towns to drag Maine, because now we were kind of
Can you explain for those
like, okay, dragging Maine is
culturally
driving all night
deprived?
up and down. Our Main Street was maybe 5 blocks. You just keep looping that Main Street all night long on Friday. Carloads of teenage kids.
Yeah.
Think American Graffiti, if you saw that movie years ago.
Happens all over America, but sometimes people don't have the word for it. So
There's
yeah.
looping Maine, there's, yeah, right, you're exactly right. And one night I was alone, and some teenage boys drove by and rolled down the window and yelled, "Hey, you're from Chamberlain, where men are men, or so are women." And I was just struck by that. And I thought, because I was a tomboy, and I thought, well, am I that? So I made a radical transformation to look more girly, which wasn't who I was comfortable being, but I was so uptight about, that suggestion that I might have been Beauvoir, which again, I didn't understand who she was or what that meant. Bev made the transition. I don't remember her prior to her transitioning into looking very masculine or being very masculine, but she made that transition. And then I've made a transition in my old age. I've learned so much and heard a lot of stories. I interviewed a number of people. I've interviewed a couple of transgender women, and they have a different experience than a male, but it's in some ways, but it's the same in others. Yeah, so
Well,
I think we always have to grow,
you always have to do what?
change,
Grow.
evolve.
Yes.
Always.
Yes. Whether we want to or not, we
Right.
keep changing.
Right.
Growth
Yeah.
is subjective,
Right.
but
Right.
objectively, we all keep changing.
Right.
I want to invite the audience to think of questions or comments, be engaged mentally as well as emotionally in this conversation. We will come back to you in a moment, but I like to remind people that this is a conversation. We do want to engage with each other. We'd like to have like as many people as feel comfortable engage, so that we can all learn from each other, each one teach one, so to speak. Okay, so back to our conversation now.
Mhm.
As you mentioned, a lot of the story did have to do with the transgender identity. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit more about what you learned from investigating and looking into peeling back this story about transgender identification?
Okay. Well, I read a lot of books, and one of them, probably one that was probably most helpful, was a book called Becoming Nicole, The Transformation of an American Family. And it was written by a Pulitzer Prize winning Washington Post science writer, and her name escapes me right now. And she followed the story of identical twin boys, identical twin boys, one of whom at 3 basically announced that he didn't want his penis anymore. Basically told his mother, "I don't want my penis, I'll cut it off," or something. And it was the whole transition for the family, and then looking at bathroom issues in the schools in Maine, testifying before Congress on these issues. And she mixes that with the science of how we develop in the womb. And I'm not a great scientist, but she's pretty clear. She made it pretty easy for even me to understand. But this is happening. This is happening in the womb. It's not happening afterwards. It starts in the womb with hormonal changes, and when do the hormones align? Does everything align as you're developing in the womb? And one person I talked to who lives in our building is a endocrinologist, a pediatric endocrinologist, and she said to me, she said it is not common, but it's not rare to see intersex babies where the outward genitalia may be one gender, but the internal is the other. And so these are things.
You say it's not rare.
Not rare, it's not common, but she has seen it. She has seen it, and she's had to talk with parents about decisions that you have to make or don't make or whatever. So this is all sort of in biology at the beginning. And then what happens after that, I suppose, is how long how long you choose to put off accepting that gender, accepting that you are, because you're looking like a man and you really feel like a woman, and how long do you live with that before it gets to you? And one of the people I interviewed said something that really struck me, and I wanted to read that. She said, the problem is a mental closet. You're living a life inside your head, And eventually you have to align your inside world with your outside world. I think people have a hard time adjusting to the idea that trans is a real thing. People believe that male to female designation means that a male has transitioned to female, not a female who was assigned male by mistake. And that just really was, I thought, helped me to clarify, because I think I'd been thinking it's a decision they made, but really it's not. They were assigned the wrong gender at birth. It's also, I learned that it's important to not to use gender and sex interchangeably. They're two very different concepts or ways of being. And that was another important thing, I think, that I read, I think it was in Coming to Cope. Sex is who you go to bed with. Gender is who you go to bed as. Which, so.
Yeah, but I think you hit on a very important part and another transition, by the way, because I think the society is also undergoing a transition in terms of understanding and having the insight to understand. And I will liken it to something as common as how babies are made. Until there was the science that showed us that actually, there's this whole other complicated thing. It's not some kind of magic thing that the male waves the magic wand, so to speak, and something happens. It's not about toilet seats or anything. There's actually, there's actually biology that happens. Before that, I think it had a lot to do with even discrimination against women. It's like, people didn't know about periods, and they certainly didn't know about PMS. And so you start to say, oh, these people are crazy. I never want to work with them. Look, they fly off the thing. Nobody ever talked about hormones because they didn't know about hormones. Now that we start to introduce it and say, oh, no, there's this other thing. And it's not like a matter of this person is even crazy. It's just like all of us are crazy in that sense, because hormones change our minds all the time and make us feel something different. So I mentioned that to say that, it's important to develop the empathy, and that's a transition. Can you talk to us a little bit about empathy in terms of the desire to understand people who, like you can't even begin to understand what their lifestyle is about?
Well, you have to be open. It has to start with that, I think, being open to other ways. And it has perhaps to be open to other stories. And I think stories are the way, whether it's, for me, a lot of it's books, but it can be just conversations. It can be getting into the story of a movie or a documentary or whatever. But immersing yourself in a story is a big part of it, I think. And I certainly did that for 7 years. I lived this story. And you mentioned menstruation. I actually have a chapter on menstruation, because one of the ways that I immersed myself into Bev's story was to try to imagine what I would have felt like. I never wanted to be a boy, but I certainly didn't like menstruation when I started. I hated it. And then I started thinking about Bev. What did it feel like for her? I mean, I'm a heterosexual girl who's not fighting my gender, but very uncomfortable with the physical process of what it meant to become a woman. But if you feel like a male, how much more challenging. And so those are just the sorts of things that Bev led me to start to think about. And the more I thought about the way Bev had to face life every day, the more I empathized with her. She was poor. She grew up in a very dysfunctional family. Her IQ, when she checked into the state hospital after the murder, was 72. After about a month later, it went up to 80. But it's still, she was very low, very low IQ. Very much an outsider in many ways, I suppose. And, I just had to start thinking about what would it feel like. And as an adolescent girl, I often felt like an outsider. I mean, I understand that feeling, but this is a whole level of feeling like an outsider when you're not comfortable with your gender, you're not comfortable with your body. So I just think it's not that simple. I won't put it that way. But one part of it is trying to immerse yourself in someone else's story, to really try to see it through their perspective. And I said to somebody, I mean, I feel sorry for her. She was a murderer. That's the complication of immersing myself into her story. She murdered someone. She murdered someone who did not deserve to be murdered. And yet I feel sorry for her. I really did empathize with her.
Did you learn anything along the way? I mean, you mentioned some things, but I'd like to peel that back a bit about the procedure, to use a clinical kind of term, in becoming empathetic to people that you don't have a connection to it. I know you said, like a couple of things, but it seems like there's more. It's more complicated than that. And I'm just wondering if you've gained any insight into that.
That's a really good question. And I don't know that I have even a bad answer right now. I'll think about it. I don't know. How does a person become open to other possibilities? Do you have an answer to that question? I mean, I'm asking you, Lawrence, if you have an answer.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah, how do we become open to other possibilities? Because you have to be open. And where does that start? Did it start with the family that raised me? Did it start with education? Did it start with the people I learned? I don't know. What do you think?
I guess if I have to go right down to where I think the ground level or the baseline is accepting one's own mortality. And I think a lot of things start with that, a lot of human things, accepting that we are mortal. That's the first thing. And then the second is, I don't know, and my experience is not everybody's experience, but I think if you can accept that you're mortal and that you will die, not you probably will die, and there's no escape, nobody gets out alive, as they say. Once you accept that, then it positions you to take other riskier positions like, I don't know, and you don't even feel you have to know, because you can start to accept also that you're not omnipotent. That's, so once we can grapple with that, and I don't say that like you can just go down to the grocery store and get that, I mean, that's a struggle within itself, but one for me that has been well worth it. And it's also one that needs maintenance. It's one thing I can wake up in the morning and say, I may die in the next 10 minutes, but as we say in the monastic life, you walk with death before you, to come to that point, to me, is the beginning of not only empathy, but knowledge and understanding and being human in general, is to understand indeed you are human, right, and you will die. Right. So, I mean, if I have to get down to like the ground level, that's what I think the struggle is about.
Yeah, that's a nice perspective. I think it's a good way to look at it. Yeah. Maybe others have another way to, how do we develop empathy? Maybe others, some of the other people here would like to comment on that.
I would love that.
I would too. I never lectured in a literature class. I ask them to talk as much as possible.
Betty, you're.
Good morning, everyone. I feel personally that where I have gained a lot of empathy is by experiencing death in the room with someone I care about who was dying. And there's that moment when they're gone, and then I don't know, I've had fortunately 3 or 4 of those experiences, and it's always, from going forward from that, it's valuable to me. It helps me to feel empathy for someone else who's experiencing it, who's afraid. So that's one thing that has helped me a lot. And you can't always choose those moments to experience. I didn't necessarily choose the ones I had, but Mary, you and I are very contemporary, and I grew up in South Dakota too. And I'm very, very interested to read your book, because someday I'm going to have time to write a few of my own.
Well, I hope, 1 page a day is 352 pages. There's a book.
No, that's true. And that's not a lot of words.
It's not it's not a completed book. It's a draft. I should put it that way.
Exactly.
It's a draft.
It's a good start, though.
Yeah, it's a good start.
If you double space it and use 16-point type, you can get through that pretty quick.
Exactly.
Coming from a man who has published several, but I know
Yeah,
that's the beginning of a book, so.
Yeah.
It is
And-
hard.
And
Betty,
it's easy
hard
to read if you do that too, you know.
I'll remember
Well-
you, Lawrence.
I think wasn't it Dorothy Parker who said the art of writing is keeping your ass in the chair?
Yeah, that's a good start too.
I think the other part for me is I had persistence, but also I have a high tolerance for failure because I failed a lot.
Yes.
Maybe still failed in this book. You'll have to tell me if this book is a failure, but
Yeah.
I had a lot of
Well,
failures.
what's your definition of failure? Like, what are you trying to accomplish with it?
I think failure is good. Actually, I think it makes you go back and try to rethink and reimagine and re-envision. I don't think it hurt me at
Well,
all.
I mean, it depends on what are you trying to achieve. Like, I have a project for next year that I absolutely cannot fail. It's dying, but anyways, I was just like listening to this and thinking about, okay, this girl, guy, whatever, could have kind of been me because I'm pretty masculine as well. And I was actually thinking of transitioning for a while, but then I found out that, or at least after a bit of soul searching, I came to the conclusion that to me, there's a better solution. But I had no idea that this story existed. And this is very interesting to me because, I mean, talking about these stories that are about people who are not perfect or people who have flaws and yet belong to the LGBT community kind of makes me feel weird because it kind of could convey the message that LGBTQ people are bad or all of us are murderers or something. And I would not want people to walk away with that message because that means more hate crime and more conflict within society. But at the same time, if the story is true, you got to tell it. So there's that too. So I guess I'm a little conflicted on this because I don't want the world to think that just because somebody is not aligned with their birth gender or their perceived gender, that means that they are bad or stupid, like the whole low IQ thing. I actually felt indignant about it when you said that because, hey, I'm not low IQ, I have a degree. What the heck?
But also the story wasn't about you. The story was about another person. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we kind of trip up on is when we hear of one person like that and we extrapolate, meaning we give that characteristics to everything that looks like that. You know, it's like it's like if you're a kid and you get bit by a dog and now you think all dogs will bite you. You know, it's like, no, that dog bit you, you know, and that dog may or may not have had motivation to bite you, you know. There's different reasons why that even happened. So it's like if we do short processing, we can extrapolate anything into like whatever we decide to make it. We can decide that all cake will make you fat. Well, yeah, if you don't do any exercise, you know, it could, you know. But so I think that's an important thing to do in terms of empathy too, is to recognize that everybody has a story, you know.
Can I read something that a reviewer, and I don't know who it is, but this is what someone wrote about it. Mary Haug opened her heart to tell this memoir of growing up in a small town in South Dakota and contrasting her life with that of 3 young people caught in a love triangle. The author digs deep into her own vulnerabilities while telling the story of Bev and Gina, 2 young women who grappled with forbidden feelings of same-sex relationships, transgenderism, and the pressure of society norms in a small town in the 1960s. Pressures that led to a murder of an innocent person. I found myself considering how our modern day society has evolved and how these circumstances would have played out today.
Mhm.
So I think I thought what that person wrote is exactly what I hope people would feel when they were done reading the book, that they would understand this was not a criticism. This is not judgmental. I was as willing to tell my own vulnerabilities and to talk about the ways in which I failed as I was to talk about the ways that Bev and Gina struggled. I don't believe in sharing somebody else's story if you're not willing to share your own. And I did. And I wrote some incredibly painful passages about how I screwed up my relationship with my father because of my insecurities and my stubbornness. And those were heartbreaking for me to write. So I think if you read the book, you will find that I stand in judgment of no one except myself. And I'm hoping that everybody who reads it comes away with that same sense of, I thought about how she made me think about these people and to really understand. So I hope you would find that if you read it.
Yeah. Well,
Everything in the book is true in terms of the events. It all came from the transcripts, as far as, the events of the murder. And the letters the women wrote were just heartbreakingly beautiful, but so painful.
Right. Yeah, I always like to underscore that whole thing about, like, if I belong to a group and someone says, oh, something about someone in that group, that somehow I own that. It's kind of like, I always feel a certain sadness when people say, I never saw anybody who looked like me do that thing. And so therefore they didn't feel like they could do it. I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're not boxed in, you're not defined by this other person, and you think, okay, how do we get past that as individuals? How do I make sure that I'm always past it? But how do I help other people see that just because nobody, let's say, that look like you or in your community ever studied nuclear physics doesn't mean that you can't.
Right.
I mean, they didn't, and whoever those people were, there was always somebody who was first in their community to do that thing. So if those people weren't limited, why do you need to be limited? And why do you need, let's say if I hear somebody who always wear black turtlenecks kill somebody, I don't feel like I'm a murderer.
Yeah.
Or I don't need to own that.
I
So
just,
go ahead.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Lee.
Finish.
Go ahead.
I just want to really commend Mary for having the intestinal fortitude of coming out and helping educating people from different aspects. And then I'm looking at this issue, if you want to call it that, but it is science can explain an awful lot about things. And one of the things that I have learned in recent years is that we have genes that are given at birth, and it's, how they're coming together. But we have a mixture. There's a difference between, like you say, what genes you have, what your DNA. There are differences, and your sexual genes are different than that is proven to be true. And I don't have the words for it, but talking to scientists and doctors who have studied this, it is, we are born this way with a skin color, whether it's race, whether it's gender, sexual, whatever, how we look, our mentality, everything. And it's nothing that we do, but life is truly a continuous adapting to who we are, to our environment, to people around us. And that's our job, is to be able to adapt and adjust what we can personally. We don't change others, but we
Right.
change ourselves.
Right.
And a lot of it's through education and understanding. And your book has brought that out so much from what you say. And I want to get it right away. But anyway, I just say hats off. I just want to say that.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. Thank you.
Mary Alice, for those who don't know, I'm Mary Alice's younger brother.
Yeah, well, go away. Because he's probably going to tell me how stupid I am. Or anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
No. And I'm 6 years younger, so I don't have as clear a memory of Bev as you do. And I just assumed all along Bev was a lesbian. I didn't have any transgender idea. And of course, that has only evolved in my head over the last 10 years, probably. How in your research did you come to conclude that she wasn't just lesbian, or he wasn't just lesbian, but was transgender? Was it in the letters? Was it just?
Well, yeah, you know, it was a couple of, well, it was in the letters. During the trial, one of the attorneys asked her, well, Bev, you know you have female body parts, right? And she said, well, sort of. And also, what the psychiatrists, and one of the psychiatrists said she was oriented to male, that she had the male feelings of a male. He was skirting around the word transgender, but he didn't have it. She had the feelings of a male, the appearance of a male. And so I tried to use throughout the book, she was likely transgender, because I can't prove that she was. There's nothing definite in the book that would say she absolutely was. I just had these little clues. And so I think she was likely transgender. I could be wrong. And one of the things that one of my writing groups was concerned about is I used the pronoun she throughout to talk to Bev about Bev rather than he. And I said, well, wait a minute. First of all, she would have called herself she, right? We didn't have any other way to look at that. And second of all, I can't do that because I'm not 100% certain that she rejected all of her feminism. She seemed to, but I'm not 100% certain. And so I didn't want to make a decision about the pronoun for her after the fact. You know, she died in, I'm thinking 2014. I'm not good at dates. And so I never had a chance to interview her. And I don't know, you know, I don't know what that would have been like. I did talk to a cousin. I did talk to some people, and a couple of cousins I talked to about her. But most of the Waugh family and the Menzie families are gone, at least that generation. Yeah, they've died.
But it does open up a discussion that we can involve ourselves in, and that is, however people are, how do we develop empathy for dealing, you know, because we have to interact with those people because they're our brothers and sisters, etc. You know, they're part of us. And even if we don't have close relationships with them, we interact with them. We will, you know, probably work with them. They may even sit next to us in some churches, you know. So has anyone, and it doesn't have to be even just transgender, it just could be people who you perceive have a much different lifestyle, i.e. point of view than you do. And how do you develop empathy for them and maybe their position in life, how they see things in life? What are some of the kind of things that, has anybody else?
Yeah, anybody else want to talk about empathy?
Yeah. What you personally have done.
Well, I just wanted to say that it's not that simple as just developing empathy, because sometimes you, like, at least I experience this a lot. I like intellectually understand what somebody else's position is, but it doesn't mean that I change my position to more closely resemble theirs.
Right. And that is so
and
fair.
also,
That's fair.
And also that doesn't mean that my emotional reactions are going to change. But for example, I have a friend who works in suicide prevention, and I disagree with it because pro-choice all the way and pro-2A and all that. So we have a disagreement with that. And I seriously don't know what to do with this. Like, I do have the empathy side. I do have like some compassion for him, but at the same time, there's a back of my head saying, this is wrong, this is unethical, you should stand up against it. And it's really weird.
Well, I think you can be, I don't think you have to understand a feeling to at least be kind to the person who has a different feeling. I don't understand. I will say I don't understand what it feels like to not want to be female. I have no understanding of that. But I don't need to be unkind to someone because they have those feelings, right? I mean, to me, it's maybe the bottom line is kindness. If you can't empathize, just be kind. And I have to think, I sometimes think that what helped me was 30 years of working with 18 to 24-year-olds who are trying to figure out who they are. And they would come in and tell me things that were like, oh, wow, I kind of wish you hadn't just told me that. Right? But I had to say, but I still really like this person. I mean, this person told me something that I'm a little uncomfortable with, but I really like this young person. And I really wish the very best for this young person, whatever path this person takes down the road. I just think you can be kind, even if you don't understand, and even if you don't develop empathy, just don't be unkind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As a reporter of 40 some years, that was my job, was to try to understand other people's perspectives. Seems like it's getting harder and harder with some perspectives.
Well, it's very hard right now.
Yeah. But I think you'd agree that we had a good start growing up on a farm with a dad who was, I think, empathetic, probably more empathetic towards other people than yours. I remember specifically when I was just barely young enough, to remember things, of a very inebriated Native American man on Main Street in Chamberlain. And there were a number of those folks when we were growing up. And I said, who is that and what's wrong with him? And I can always remember my dad said, that's a man just like me. He's just got problems. That's all. Yeah. He's just like me. He's just got problems.
He was, I think, unusually open for a man of his generation. This is an example for me, and maybe if you don't know what it was like to be Catholic marrying a Protestant in 1968, but let me tell you, it still was not happening. And when I told my father that I was marrying Ken, who was Methodist, he said, is he a good man? And I said, he's a very good man. He said, that's all that matters. Now, this was a time when some people weren't going to their children's weddings because it was not in a Catholic church or it wasn't in a Lutheran church. And he said, is he a good man? That's all that matters. So he was a pretty unusual guy, and we missed a lot of years of learning more from him, didn't we, Kevin? Lots of years. But we live his legacy.
Yeah, there you go. That you're still being him, Are there any other ideas about thoughts about empathy? How you practice it? What do you think about it? Is it useful? Anything? Have you ever felt it?
Like, sorry, it's me again, but useful, that's a good question there, because sometimes the other problem with empathy is that you can have too much of it. Like, for example, when I had my breakup, I would never think that it was Lauren's fault. I was like, what did I do wrong? What did I fuck up? And it just couldn't enter my mind that a Marine could actually have flaws, which is completely crazy to think about right now. But yeah, it's like, where do you draw the line between empathizing with others and actually empathizing with yourself? That's
well, and
question.
I don't think we have to, I mean, there are things that are just plain wrong. So am I going to be empathetic with everyone? No, I think there are things that are wrong. People do things that are wrong. But I think you can draw the line between that, perhaps, and at least look into the background of that person. Maybe, I mean, we don't know I used to think, I don't know what these students leave in the morning when they come into my classroom. I don't know what kind of a day they've had. And I just have to be open to them and try to make this hour a good hour for them. That today they're going to have a good hour, because some of them had pretty tough times. And like I said, I didn't always agree with what they were telling me they were doing. I mean, I was just like, whoa, I couldn't do that. But, you know, they were learning. I don't know.
Well,
No.
you know, I think useful discussions always begin with a definition of terms. So I put the definition of empathy in the chat, and it's the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It has nothing in there about agreeing with them.
Right. You don't have to agree.
That's right. There's nothing in there about agreeing with them. It's not, you're not giving up some part of yourself
No.
to understand and share the feelings
Right.
of others.
Right.
And for some people, they have a hard time parsing that or separating the two. It's all in one big box.
Right.
Like, even if you say, well, I understand you, a lot of people will get upset because they think, well, you're agreeing with that person. That's not right.
Yeah.
No, I see how they came to that, how they put that together. I
Right.
disagree with that because there are some things that they left out that I'm not sure that they would have the same perspective if they put in. Betty, you wanted to say something?
There was a point not too many years ago where someone drew a line between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone or sad for them. Empathy is when you actually know what that feels like. And that's helped me to be
Right.
with it again, to know when I am and when I'm not. Yeah.
And the other thing that's helpful is to be able to hold two contradictory thoughts in your brain at the same time, which is not easy for any of us to do probably, but you have to be able to say, well, this is, well, yes, this, but then this, but you know,
Yes.
but that's
Yeah.
growing up.
I think we hold contradictory emotions, and we're often aware of those things, but somehow we think if we have an idea that the ideas all have to be, you know, synchronous or synchronized.
Mhm.
And that usually doesn't work out too well because you know, it's like the snake that keeps, you know, will eat its own tail at some point.
Right.
That's kind of how the brain is put together. And that's what we have. So that's what we use. Any other thoughts about how you can come to empathize with others? What are some of the things that we can do? What are some of the practices? Because I'm big on practices anyway. It's like, you know, this is all cocktail talk unless we do something with it, you know? What can we do to increase, assuming that we want to, increase our ability to empathize with others?
Well, I think reading to me is one of the main things that I do for that. And that actually brings me to a question for Mary. Can you talk about just this process of writing this book? And I'm assuming you had a goal of helping other people empathize and helping other people, you know, learn this story and learn from it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, I don't know that I started out with that goal. I think what I started out with was trying to make sense of my own obliviousness, if you will, to what happened that night of the murder, and what happened and what had been going on prior to that and after that, and how a small town reacted to it. You know, it went through so many drafts. I can't even tell you how many drafts. And you know, at first I think I was just going to tell a nonfiction story. I was just going to write about the murder. And then the more I read about it, the more I began to think, okay, maybe I need to look at how this, you know, what was my role in here? Or maybe I need to bring my own story into this to give it not validity, but humanity, so that I'm not just reporting a murder, that I'm willing to, as I said, I'm willing to expose myself. Every book I read, every person I talked to, more things were added all the time. And I learned a little bit more and was able to incorporate that into the story as I went. I didn't sit down with, my worst thing is narrative structure. I never know how I'm going to put a book together. So all I can do is write scenes and then eventually try to figure out how to make those scenes into some sort of logical order in the book. And in this book, I ultimately chose chronological, whether it shows up that it's chronological, but it is. But a lot of it was just sitting there working my way through a scene. So, oh, let's think of an example. The night of the murder, when we were riding around town, we're all kind of hysterical about this and just weird, you know. I tried to write that scene, and I sat there and I thought, okay, what kind of a car were we in? And I didn't remember that, but how did I feel? What was going on outside? Who else was out and about driving and so forth? So I could make that scene come to life. And that's part of what I do in my writing, is really try to immerse myself into that moment to see if those facts come back to me. I would also say I did a lot of like if I said the moon was full, I actually went back and looked up if the moon was full on June 15th, 1962, because I thought some reader's going to find out. No, it was not. It was, I mean, I really did do that. When I wrote about the Rainbow Cafe, I actually went online and dug around for postcards so that how I described the cafe was accurate. So there's a lot of silly research that goes on, because somebody's going to say, well, that can't be. I looked it up and it was a half moon that day. So part of that is also just doing that. But I just think I realized I had to put myself in this book in order to tell the story with any kind of compassion.
I think that is another word that comes up along with empathy, is compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Being able to, and even feeling the need to connect with others on that emotional level. I think that's a good human quality to have. At least I found it so.
Very.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, Mary Alice.
Well, Charles Woodard. It's Charles Woodard. Yes.
Here I am, and here you are.
Yes, that's right.
Live and in living color.
Yes.
Thanks for being on.
Mhm.
Well, as far as empathy is concerned, I think the first thing I would say is that I've learned it through my own suffering and the suffering of others. But also, harking back to what Ryan just said, through literature, what oft was thought but ne'er so well expressed. I've always told my students that literature is the history of the human spirit, history of feeling, and that we deepen our understanding of ourselves and of others through reading. And that's an ongoing process for me. I read a lot, and I have daily emotional experiences reading literature, which deepen my understanding of what it feels like to be human for me, and I think to a considerable extent for others. So I'm interested in you talking a little bit about the writers who have particularly moved you like that, who have given you, to some extent, the gift of empathy or more empathy. Which writers would you talk about in response to that question?
I think the writer that most drew me to Memoir was A River Runs Through It. And that particular first chapter, when I just really fell into the story of these brothers and their Scotch Presbyterian father, and the struggles that the family had, and the beauty of that language. And I would think that's when I discovered Memoir. That was one of the earliest memoirs, and I've been hooked on them ever since. Willa Cather, My Antonia is a book that made me love my father more. My father was 22 and I was 22 and my father died. Kevin was 16. So that's a huge gap in our lives at a very young age, really. And he was bohemian, and Mr. Shimerda just reminded me of my father, whether it's true or not. So I would say Cather's book, My Antonia, is one that always comes to mind. Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich really gave me an opening into re-examining and rethinking my own experience with Native people and what I had missed by being so oblivious to them. And that particular book, Love Medicine, really opened up a whole world for me. And I can, I don't pretend I write like her, but boy, did she make me, that really influenced me a lot. Trying to think who else. Poetry, Mary Oliver and Wendell Berry. Absolutely, those move me a great deal. Kevin Wooster's poetry, which, by the way, I think will probably be a book sometime, don't you, Chuck? Are you going to help me with this project?
Well, I've been nagging him about that for a long time.
I know. Well, we need to enlist more people.
And he seems to be leaning in that direction lately, so.
I think so. I think he's ready. I'm ready, and I'm bossy.
Kevin, say something about the book you just recommended to me by Graves. I got a copy and I'm just starting to read it, but I have the idea that it has had this kind of effect on you, deepened you in certain ways, because you've read it a couple times and you're rereading it, or Mary is reading it to you.
Yes, and listening to it on audio. John Graves wrote Goodbye to a River for a river trip he took in 1959 before a stretch of the Brazos River that he'd known growing up was going to be covered by a dam. And he took a little dachshund, 6-month-old dachshund with him, and they just got in a canoe and went down this river in November, which was not the best time to go. And this book came out of that. And the memoir, the way he looked at the history of the land and the ecological changes and the native people that had lived there, the Saxon people, as he called them, that came in and confronted the people who were, of course, the Comanches, one of the great horse societies on earth ever. And everything in there, again, lots of empathy, lots of looking at different cultures and different ways of being and conflicts that happened, and looking at the land and what that meant to him. That was a memoir that I think changed my life. It's one of those things that can be life-changing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from these accounts is that the way these stories help the most is that they help by making you step out of your own story. Because what I'm finding in my own experience is that I use or try to use reading and listening as a way to forget my own shit. Sorry for the vocabulary, but seriously, like I'm just trying to, if I can get a break from the overwhelming part, like for example, the fact that I've been promised the 45 to the heart, and then that promise was broken. And there's a lot of how dare you feeling with that. And if I can get like a break from that and just see something different, it doesn't have to be like somebody else's, like it doesn't have to be tragic, it doesn't have to be anything like deep or whatever, just somebody else's piece of reality that is beyond the fact that it fucking hurts. Then that, I guess that could help, because when you're preoccupied with your own stuff, then empathy is hard because it's just in front of you. And
empathy probably is hard. That's probably a very fair thing to say. It could be hard.
Well, we're getting near the end of our hour here, and I will add to that, Mary, that being human is hard.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line. We're all in a kind of struggle, trying to be more human. Empathy, I think, is one of the things that, in order to connect with other human beings and therefore greater realize ourselves, that empathy is an important connector with all of that. So I would encourage people to think a little bit more, and maybe even, as you were saying, Lila, we can get out of our shells, but we can do better than books. we can actually go out and experience something after we read the book. If we get inspired by a book, if we just go to the next book, we're just sort of floating around it. We haven't put the clutch plate has not engaged, let's say. The engine's spinning, but there's no motion, there's no wheel motion, there's no rubber on the road. If you want to really experience something and make this, whatever you read in that book, real, get a life, as they say, go out and do something with other people, engage with other people. And then that's one way I think we can find empathy, is actually being involved with other people.
Provided that they want to be involved with you, because sometimes they just don't. Like, I lost a whole bunch of friends during last week because, various stuff, but mostly because of disagreements regarding end of life choices.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just, it takes both sides.
Or you can go find other friends. There's 7.5 billion people in the world.
Somebody's.
It's like, if those people are not working out for you because you've changed, you're a different person, you have a different thing, make your tribe. Anyway, it's 11:31 now.
Thanks, Lawrence. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thanks
Great
everyone
visiting
for
with you. Bye-bye.
participation. See you next week on a brand new.